Alright, making a video. I think a VloggerDome video. Uh, Style differences. Changing the environment a little bit. See what happens. Two subjects. Daspook had made a video. Kind of, with the painting videos, which is good, but, and I'm been supportive of that. It's just kind of a rag video on, the, the survivability, the usefulness, the value of this effort to do better philosophy, and I just thought it was a cheap rag, and so I'll respond to that. And the second part was the Magic Sandwich Show last week did have a conversation a lot about belief and how it's constructed, mostly in the context of the religious argument. The why is religion fundamentally illogical kind of approach to looking at it. And it wasn't the usual characters, Thunderfoot and Concordance of some other guys. And, they use these lines that you hear a lot, like you measure an idea by how well it works, which is, I think that's just dangerous. I think you have to define what working is first. Um, so that's the point I guess I'll make. And the other one, predictive ability. And I think most of the useful philosophy might not have too much predictive ability. I mean, it's not going to necessarily give you an ability to predict, in tight ranges anyway. I mean, you can almost argue that some economic theories are like that. You can have an understanding that something's unsustainable over time, but you're not going to be able to say when it'll explode. It's like space shuttles or something. You could know that there's a 1 in 70 chance of catastrophic failure, per launch, and but you're not going to be able to guess which flight is going to fail. you know, so that predictive value is good, but it isn't the only way a theory gains credibility. And certainly with all ethical theories, I don't think it has any relevance to the real value of philosophy, which is the questions of ethics. So I don't think it adds anything to that conversation at all. Um, so that's the frame of this video anyway. So it's sort of related to the VloggerDome first episode, which is going to be sort of about the whole approach of language and words and what philosophy is. I guess would be the point of it, is to make this distinction between that logic there is such a thing as a logical proof. I guess that would be one of the points to be emphasized, to be made. There's that logic paints things into corners where you just can't escape the logic. It'll give you no option, and therefore will be conclusive in a sense. You can do that with logic. So you can create a kind of an absolute logical paradox that just will say this is the only viable conclusion based on available imagination. There's no available reasonable scenario to complete with an idea, and the idea is going to have enough evidence to defend it, then it's going to be a defendable proposition, and it won't be reasonably challenged. It'll only be challenged by somebody who has some other agenda, some bias or bigotry, or tendency to reason, to not want it to be the truth kind of argument. So I'd say Das Book was a lot of that. So first of all, I made some kind of challenge or statement, like whether this channel is going to be popular or not. And this channel is not intended to be popular. It's the production channel, so it's intended to be useful in the construction of VloggerDome, the TV show. That's sort of the emphasis here. Um, and but clearly the consequence of the show being a reasonable product will be that it will be viewed highly, and but it could be published on a lot of different channels. I mean, all the participants I would give the right to publish, certainly, and you know, so I would probably publish it on the Emendum channel, so the Emendum channel would probably glean any benefit. But the point is to make something, is to produce something, a quality product that will be viewed, not necessarily viewed for my purposes, but just viewed for the purpose of being viewed in venues that we may not have any way of measuring density. Public access is really hard to tell who's seeing what you're producing. But anyway, we'll see what the byproduct is. We'll see if there is a byproduct, but that's not what it's being produced for. It's not the purpose of creating a byproduct of. The purpose is to create a quality piece of goods that will enhance the capacity to have a conversation about what reality is. And I mean, its real dig to this whole thing, I think, is more just about this idea, and this idea too that I'm like some ogre imposing some rules about what kind of words are going to be allowed or used or something is nonsense. If people choose and want to debate and use these words, then they'll be argued, you know, that's not useful conversation, that there's nothing logically you can do with that mumbo jumbo. If somebody has anecdotal stories of their personal life, you don't make national policy. You don't decide what to, how often you're going to do airplane maintenance based on one person's experience on an airplane. That would be silly. So there's lots of conversations people wish to engage in that are outside the bounds of reasonable conversation, and they can be just demonstrated to be outside the bounds of a reasonable argument. You've got to do better than that. The whole point of VloggerDome is sort of this idea of a trial, the idea of ideas being on trial, a test. The standards going to be high for proof, let's say, but there's also going to be standards of what is and is not evidence. And it's just going to, you can testify, you can say it, and then there's going to be an objection, and the objection is going to state why that's not a valid point to be making. It's not relevant to the evidence that is reasonably considered, and that's the only distinction being made. Or I mean, there's, like I said, there's no rule beyond the fact that I'm going to attempt to be careful in my use of language, and when I say something, which will happen inevitably, I'll use a cliche. I'll do an Einstein thing and say God doesn't play dice with the universe, even though somebody can understand what that means, in the sense that he doesn't believe in either the existence of God or the fact that dice are somehow random. It's just it sounds nice, and sometimes we say something because it sounds nice. It's got a nice poetry to it, and it sends the message, but it just doesn't send it carefully enough for it to be manipulated by people who wish to manipulate. And so that's more what this is about, is to prevent people from taking words and perverting their meaning to their purposes, and then claiming an agreement when agreement hasn't been achieved. That kind of thing. And I just think it is important to recognize there's just huge distinctions between these words. In the comments, Carl made some kind of comment comparing love and the word suffering, as if these are comparable in terms of their fallibility as descriptions of something. And So again, there's more games being played with words, in terms of not recognizing that, love is a word used as a placeholder for a kind of altruistic mega respect, that some kind of love could be considered, where you are more concerned with somebody else's welfare than your own, not for any personal ego reason, just because you admire that person so much or value them or think they're so much better than yourself even. um, that kind of complete love, pure almost, and the love of lust. So these are very different things, and most people, 99.999% of people, would never pervert the word suffering into any other form. They wouldn't say, the hangnail is suffering, or you suffered because you had a stain on your shirt. They know the word to mean to get a certain class of experience where the individual is in some sort of distress, harm, emotional or physical, that is of a certain extreme level. And so it doesn't have there's not even close to the same variance in use. Suffering is easily understood as a concept, where love is very difficult to understand as a concept of what you're talking about, because love is a word of affection or attachment, and those attachments can be of all kinds of corruption. The attachment of breed, of nepotism, familial, lots of illegitimate associations that don't have any kind of consistency in terms of the merit of the yes vote. If love was considered some sort of affirmation of goodness in something, it's an affirmation created by very different mechanisms, um, and some of them are quite the antonym, the opposite of what you would consider a good thing. Bigotry is not a good thing. Subjective bias is not a good thing. It's not a good reason. Uh, Attractiveness, physical attractiveness, is just a kind of a lust. It's not a good thing. Doesn't have anything to do with something's merit. It has to do with your addictions, your attachments, and that's breaks the standard. So anyway, I didn't want to get into a lengthy discussion over that one word, but that's what you're up against with people and their abuse and distortion and perversion of every conversation. Um, you see the people constantly in comment sections playing games with words. Again, if Einstein was alive, people would play, what do you mean playing dice with the universe? What do you mean God? Uh, you um, time is an illusion, but it's one hell of an illusion. So then they'll, argue about what do you mean? Are you saying it doesn't exist, or does it exist? This, um, So, they just want to nitpick and naysay and degrade an argument because they don't like the argument. And they're just playing games with the words because the words are imprecise. And so the more precise we can make our conversation, it can only enhance conversation. The Carl person also left a link to some sort of logic language, which is obviously, those are also written by people who have their own agenda, and so the words that are included or excluded are to their purpose. And I don't have much to say about that, is that beyond the fact that I'll be measured for what words I say are detrimental to conversation, and words that are still quite useful. We have plenty of useful words. It's not like we don't have the words to communicate accurately. We just have too many noisy words. We have too many words that are dirty and tainted by inconsistent definition. And so if we just avoid the words that have a lot of inconsistency in their definition, the personal perception of what they mean, the in-between colors, between yellow and red, between yellow and blue, you can you can sort of see that there's colors for which we have coral, maybe some vaguish, fuzzy notion of what that is to me and what it is to you. The shade difference might be very dramatic, but when we say red, it's a stop sign red kind of red, you know. It's usually more consistent. So I'm just saying, if we stick to the primary vocabulary, the fundamental vocabulary, and just be very careful about using words that are not well, solidly or consistently defined, then we're less likely to have transmission errors in communication, and less likely to have to keep breaking conversations because premises that were stated to be of agreeable premises were not agreeable, as it turns out, because there wasn't an explicit enough statement about what the premises of conversation are. And that leaves people too many outs where they can always go back to the beginning and say, well, God says, and you've already stated that there's no God says. No sentences can begin with that. We're going to eliminate that as a viable counter argument, because God doesn't exist. And if you don't get that right, then you're not going to get a lot of other things right. I mean, really, there is a fact staircase, and you can be a little bit off in how you're stepping on the stairs. It can be a little sloppy, and it's a little uncomfortable if you miss the stair a little bit, but you can't be too sloppy. And if and you make too big an error, you're walking in space, and you're gonna, like the coyote, disappear eventually. So yeah, it's probably enough. I don't know if yeah, I think I'll go a little bit on the logic argument. So I mean, it's just a simple complaint I have. I just don't think I don't think all proofs have to come with some sort of here, I predicted this, therefore I know what I'm talking about, or some notion where I say, well, look, it works. Because how long something works, is part of that problem too. I could say nuclear power plants worked because, for the first 10 years they didn't melt down, or 20. Does that mean they work? Does it mean nuclear power works? You can't use that argument, this working argument, for a lot of reasons. One would be long-term versus short-term. We don't even know if we work. This idea of being intelligent could fail dismally in the sense that we don't last more than, a few thousand years, and then we're extinct. We won't be around for millions or any of that kind of stuff, because it doesn't have a sustainable function. There's not checks against the power it creates. Certainly those arguments can be made. So the word working is just too messy an idea to use as a standard for when you have got the truth. Okay, the truth isn't Nazi Germany if it worked. If Hitler won the war, does that mean Nazism was right? Come on, it's just this working argument doesn't mean anything when it isn't, when work isn't defined clearly, and when work is defined as it makes us survive. Again, I could just make the argument for how long. Survive what? The first 100 years of technology? Well, that doesn't mean much. We've survived nuclear weapons, but is there any evidence that we'll survive them forever? you so I just don't think that's it's just not valuable. And my counter argument is that I think you can make logical arguments demonstrating a truth, like suffering sucks, or that there is a value equation, there's an efficiency to our function, that we exist in the world, that we have an impact on it, that can be substantially measured, and we can, generally speaking, know whether there was what part of the curve we're going to fall on in terms of our likely effect. Obviously, you can't anticipate all nuances of chance. So yeah, now I said nuances of chance when there really isn't any chance. There's just the nuances, the vagaries of our ignorance of detail. So again, we might not be able to predict when the next hurricane will arrive, but we can predict it will arrive. It will. There will be one. You know. So anyway, it's probably enough. So I'll keep on doing tests, different camera approaches and angles and such. As I should tape that up. Yeah, that should be a good idea, Gary. You should tape that up so you don't drop it. Anyway, so till next time and such.